Welcome everyone to the fourth and final webinar in the Early Learning Network Spring webinar series. My name is Lisa Kanoki and I'm one of the co-principal investigators for the Early Learning Network lead team at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. This spring, our biweekly series has brought you experts from across the country to share research findings from the network. And we've had an opportunity to highlight policies and practices to help children maintain early learning success during the critically important period from pre-kindergarten or pre-K through grade 3. Today, we have an opportunity to focus on individualized assessment and instruction and early learning. This is an important theme across the set of the network's nationwide studies. So the presenters we have today will share insights and information about a new technology-based classroom observation tool that the network is developing, piloting, and testing called OLOS, or Optimizing Learning Opportunities for Students. OLOS is being tested in classrooms across the US, pre-K to grade 3, to use children's assessment data along with classroom observations to collect and interpret all available information associated with child outcomes across the transition from preschool through the early elementary grades. So its innovation really lies in the integration of assessment information to guide individualized instruction for students. So as we're getting started, I have a few housekeeping items at the outset here. So this webinar is being recorded and streamed live on our Facebook page. We will be making a video of today's presentation available along with slides and other resources by next week on the Early Learning Network website. Because there are so many of you on the call today, we had to mute you, but we still would like to hear from you. Your participation is very important to us. So throughout the presentation and during the formal Q&A period that will follow the two presenters, we invite you to submit your questions using the Q&A button that you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will try our best. We'll be tracking those and try our best to answer them before the end of the webinar. And if you use the Q&A feature, that helps our team view and organize our questions more efficiently, and it helps prevent some questions from being lost. If you're joining us on Facebook, welcome. You also may submit your questions in the comment section of our Facebook live video, and we'll be tracking those. So you may certainly use the chat box to engage in dialogue throughout the webinar. And we encourage you to kind of share your collective thoughts and observations there, comments that you'd like the group to see, engage in discussion with your colleagues. But if you have specific questions for their presenters, please submit those via the Q&A function. So right now, I invite you to use the chat to do just that. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your name, where you're located, your role in early childhood education. We'd love to know who's joining us today. We know we have registrants from across the country and from professionals in a variety of sectors. So please let us know who you are and the community that you represent. So thank you all for joining us today. Lastly, you can access closed captions on this webinar by clicking the CC button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So in a minute, I'll turn things over to today's presenters. But first, I want to give you a brief overview of the Early Learning Network and its mission. So the nationwide Early Learning Network was established in 2016, and it's funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. Our mission is to work collectively to advance the understanding of policies and practices that narrow the achievement gap and maintain early learning success as children transition from pre-K to elementary school and beyond. The network consists of 5 research teams, 1 assessment team, and a network lead team. Our research teams are studying transitions that children experience from pre-K into kindergarten in communities across multiple regions of the country, ranging from rural to urban locations, and representing families and children of various racial, ethnic, and linguistic backgrounds. Here you can see a map that shows where the teams are located in different parts of the US. MDRC and the University of Michigan are conducting a study in Boston public schools. The Ohio State University's team is gathering data in the state of Ohio. University of Nebraska-Lincoln team is conducting a study in rural and urban communities in Nebraska. The team at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is studying children and families in rural North Carolina. And the University of Virginia is conducting their work in Fairfax County, a diverse county in Northern Virginia. The University of California, Irvine is conducting a unique assessment study. They are developing and piloting the OLOS tool that we'll hear about today. And so that is the team that is highlighted in today's webinar. So as you know, today's conversation is focused on individualized instruction and assessment. Many of you joining us today are educators or are in roles that support educators. So you know intimately that children learn differently and enter each grade with varying skills. You also recognize that a one-size-fits-all sort of approach to instruction may put some students at a disadvantage. So simply put, it's important to understand the kind of instruction that each student needs to be successful and to help them get to and meet grade level expectations. So leveraging technology-based tools to provide more personalized learning opportunities may be key to help children achieve and maintain early learning gains as they move across pre-K to grade 3. So there's a significant need for better classroom observational tools that are aligned with children's assessment data, that give teachers meaningful, real-time, and easy-to-use information and instructional recommendations to help them meet students' specific individualized needs. So to that end, the Early Learning Network's assessment team, primarily based at the University of California, Irvine, has been developing this innovative technology-based classroom observation system known as OLOS. OLOS was created by the late Carol Connor, who was a pioneer in the field of early childhood research, whom we were fortunate to have as principal investigator for the UC Irvine team until May of last year. So with Dr. Connor's leadership, our network teams have been piloting OLOS in different locations across the country that were indicated on that map over the last 5 years, and using it to assess the various classroom factors that can have lasting effects on children's learning and school achievement. So today, we're going to discuss the importance of using assessment and observational tools to guide individualized instruction, particularly as it relates to early literacy. So we're going to hear specifically about 2 technology supports, the OLOS observation system, as well as assessment to instruction, or a tool called A2i. We're very pleased today to welcome one of the leaders from the Early Learning Network's assessment teams, as well as an elementary school teacher who has firsthand experience using OLOS. So together, they will share their research insights and information in their presentation, Optimizing Learning Opportunities for Students, a tool for practitioners to individualize instruction. So as a reminder, please use that Q&A button that's at the bottom of your screen, not chat, to post your questions for the presenters. This will allow us to keep careful track of all those questions that are coming in, but feel free to use the chat to reflect and engage in conversation with the rest of the audience, and share your insights and reactions. We'd love to have that. So I'm very pleased to introduce Ashley Adams and Sara Ruffner, each who have extensive experience in using individualized instruction as an approach to promote optimal learning and development. Dr. Ashley Adams is an assistant professor in speech, language, and hearing sciences at San Diego State University and is a co-PI on the OLOS study. And Sara Ruffner is a literacy outcome specialist for Learning Ovations in the Western Pennsylvania region. And Learning Ovations is an organization that uses the patented A2i professional support system to improve K-3 literacy. Sara also has 14 years of experience teaching first and second grade in the Denver, Colorado area. So I'm going to turn things over to Ashley to begin this joint presentation, and then we'll spend some time with doing discussion and reflection and have time for your questions. So Ashley, please take it away.
Thanks so much for that nice introduction, Lisa. I actually am going to be able to go quickly through some of these first slides because you did such a nice job introducing what I'm going to be talking to you about today. So just briefly, I'm going to be, as Lisa mentioned, talking to you about these two tools or technological supports available for individualizing instruction. So I'll start by talking to you about the assessment to instruction, or A2i tool. And within that, we'll talk about individualized assessment and grouping of students, as well as lesson planning. And then I'll talk to you about the Optimizing Learning Opportunities for Students, or OLOS observation tool that we've been developing as part of the Early Learning Network. By the end of today, I want you to be able to understand how those two systems work together to support individualized instruction, and to be able to hear both researcher and practitioner perspectives on using those tools. I do have to start by acknowledging the Institute of Education Sciences for their financial support for this work, as well as Lisa mentioned, the late Dr. Carol Connor, who is really the creative mind behind all of the tools I'm going to be talking to you about today, as well as Dr. Deborah Vandell, who is the current PI on the OLOS project, and other members of the Individualized Student Instruction Laboratory who've supported this work. Okay, so first I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page in thinking about what we mean by individualized instruction, or you'll often hear this referred to as differentiated instruction. And so what I really mean by individualized instruction is that in some way, the teacher modifies instruction to fit the learning needs of different children in the same classroom. And as many of you know, this is very important whether you're a pre-K, elementary, or high school teacher, because within a single classroom, you're likely to have students who have different needs, backgrounds, interests, language abilities, and cultural backgrounds. And all of these things make it important that instruction is in some way modified to meet the individual needs of these different children in the classroom. With that in mind, Dr. Connor developed the Assessment to Instruction, or A2i professional support system for K-3 teachers, with work ongoing to extend this down into the pre-K space. So A2i consists of 4 elements that I want to talk to you about today. The embedded assessments, the data-driven instructional recommendations, the aligned lesson plans, and the customized support. So let's first start by talking about the A2i assessments. There are 3: word match game, letters to meaning, and reading for meaning. So I'll start by telling you about word match game. This is a vocabulary and semantic knowledge assessment, which essentially shows children 3 words and asks them to pick the 2 that go together best. It happens on a touch screen, so kids as young as 4 can simply touch the screen, or they can also do this with the assistance of a test administrator. And so they pick the 2 words that go together best. The great thing about these assessments is that there's a large bank of items, so children can take these assessments multiple times throughout the school year to track their progress without seeing the same items multiple times. The assessments are also adaptive, so that if children are getting questions correctly, then the items will increase in difficulty. And as they start to encounter items that are too difficult for them and they start to get them wrong, then the difficulty of the items will adjust downwards until the assessment algorithm gets a really good estimate of what the child's current abilities are. The second assessment I want to tell you about is the letters to meaning assessment. So this is an assessment of letter and word knowledge, word reading. And so the youngest students in pre-K would see an item like this, and they would be asked to point to the letter S, for example. Then children are asked to identify letters by their sounds. So they might show us the letter that makes that S sound. And in that case, choose the letter S. As children demonstrate that they're able to name letters and their sounds, they move on to more difficult items where they hear a word read aloud and are asked to choose it from a set of words. So in this case, they would have heard point to the word mom. And as children progress and have demonstrate that they have those foundational skills, they're asked to do some spelling items where they drag letters over to the line to spell a word that they hear read aloud. And finally, the oldest children, or the children with the most advanced reading skills, have to drag words over to the line to form sentences. So this starts to get at some higher level language skills and being able to form grammatical sentences. That's the letters to meaning assessment. The final assessment I'll tell you about is the reading for meaning assessment. This is meant for just the second and third graders and is a more traditional reading comprehension measure where children read a paragraph and are asked to pick a word that makes sense in the context of that paragraph. So this really gets at their ability to understand the meaning of what they've read. And I just want to take a brief pause here to talk a little bit about some theory and why specifically we have these three assessments that we've chosen as important to measure when thinking about children's reading comprehension skills. So this is one of my favorite models of reading, and it's called Scarboroughs reading rope. And what I want you to see here is that skilled reading comprehension is really made up of many different threads, but largely that come from two areas. So the first is these blue threads that you see at the bottom that are the word recognition skills. These are the skills that children need to be able to crack the code of English. So being able to understand how letters and sounds correspond and how to sound out words that they see. And so these are often referred to, and you'll hear me refer to them in the rest of this presentation, as code-focused skills. And these are the skills that we assess with the letters to meaning assessment. Now, once children have been able to crack that code and are able to sound out the words that they see on a page, they're going to have to rely on their language comprehension skills or meaning-focused skills to be able to then understand those words that they've read. So things like vocabulary, language structures like syntax and semantics, and background knowledge are all important for being able to understand the words that you've read. And so this is the skills that we're getting at with the word match game assessment. Finally, that reading for meaning assessment really gets at the children's ability to integrate all of these skills and execute skilled reading comprehension. So that's what we assess with that final assessment that I showed you. Now, all of the things that you're seeing here focus on skills that a child has, but it's really important to recognize that all of those skills interact with instruction. That is, reading doesn't develop, or is very unlikely to develop, without explicit instruction in how to map letters and sounds to each other. And so what this model that Dr. Connor published in 2016 called the lattice model of reading comprehension shows is that all of those language skills and linguistic processes and code-focused skills really pass through and interact with instruction throughout time, and that element of instruction is very, very important to consider when thinking about children's reading outcomes. So with that in mind, another element of A2i that I want to tell you about is once we've assessed these skills and we know what children's code-focused and meaning-focused skills are when they enter the classroom, how can we then make instructional recommendations to make sure that those children continue to grow in their literacy skills? So what I'm showing you here is an algorithm or an equation. And this isn't one of the real A2i equations, but it's a simplified version that I wanted to show you. Essentially, what A2i does is takes the results of those different assessments and plugs them into an equation, and that equation outputs recommendations for different groups within a classroom. So here what you can imagine is that every child in a first grade classroom, for example, has been assessed, and what the A2i daily recommended group minutes is saying is we think there's 4 groups in this classroom that could benefit from different individualized instruction. So here you can see that group 1 is recommended to have 8 minutes of teacher managed, meaning focused. You can see the acronyms down here. 17 minutes of teacher managed, code focused, 5 minutes of child managed, meaning focused. That's instruction that the child works on with their peers or independently without the teacher. And 5 minutes of child managed, code focused. In the pre-K space, there's also recommendations for play, as we know that play is a really important vehicle for learning in that pre-K space. And then if there's leftover time, it's assigned to bonus meaning focused. That's extra time working on vocabulary and building background knowledge. So you can imagine that, for example, these groups 1 and 2 are these children who really need to be able to spend some more time with the teacher, building up those code focused skills or understanding letters and sounds and how to read words. Whereas this bottom groups need a little bit less of that. It's likely that these children have already begun to master those letter sound mappings and how to read words, and they can spend more time working on building up their oral language skills. So this gives an overview of the classroom, but there's also more specific group level information where individual children's recommendations for teacher managed, meaning and code focused, and child managed, meaning and code focused, recommendations are given. So teachers are able to see at a very detailed level what each child's recommended minutes of instruction are. And this is coming directly from their performance on those A2i assessments. The final element, or sorry, one of the next element of A2i that I want to tell you about is then, okay, so now I know how much time children are supposed to spend in each of these areas. The next step is what activity am I going to use to then meet those minutes? And so A2i also includes a lesson planning tool. And so here what you're able to see is that for group 1, we're seeing a average of that group's performance on the different assessments and again, the recommendations for each of those minutes. And if you open one of these areas, then what you're going to see is a link to evidence-based curriculum, curricular activities that can then be used to meet those minutes. And so you can see, for example, we have a sentence picture match activity for grade K and 1. It's going to tell you the Common Core standard that meets and how long that activity would last. And if you just click on that view activity button, it's going to take you to a PDF, tell you all the materials that you need to then execute that activity in the classroom. The final element of A2i is then the customized support. And so this system is offered with support from a literacy outcomes specialist that works with each district and teacher to plan for implementation and to provide support and coaching for teachers in implementing A2i in the classroom. And one of the really important elements that the literacy outcomes specialist, who you're going to hear from in just a few minutes, works with it on teachers is how close then are teachers actually getting to hitting those recommended minutes for each child. And here is sort of where the Early Learning Network enters the scene. And so our charge at University of California, Irvine was then to create a observation tool that could be used by practitioners to assess pre-K and early elementary school classrooms that are predictive of later learning and school achievement. Throughout our participation in the Early Learning Network, we've been working on a focus on the earliest learners and refining our pre-K algorithms and incorporating play into the recommendations. And of course, developing this observation system that can be used to capture instruction and student and teacher talk in the classroom all the way from pre-K up to 3rd grade. So as Lisa had mentioned, OLOS is an observation system that can capture the classroom experiences of individual children. And it's really got a focus on observing students. It does have a teacher observation component as well, but the focus is on observing individual students in the classroom. And it's really designed to be used for and by practitioners with a focus on providing immediate actionable information for teachers to support individualized instruction. So let's take a look at the tool. This is the student screen. So as you can see here, it's used on an iPad and can be used to observe one student, as what you're seeing here, or as many as 3 students simultaneously. If we zoom in on the top half of this screen, what we're able to capture with this portion of the screen is what kind of instruction are children getting in the classroom. So you can see up here at the top, for example, that you can capture whether a student is on task or off task. That is, whether they're engaged in the learning opportunity. You can capture whether the instruction being provided to them is literacy, math. In this other drop-down menu, we have things like science, social studies, art, music, and mealtime. And then non-instruction is times where students are in transition, or perhaps a teacher has to pause instruction to manage some behavior in the classroom. We're also able to capture whether the instruction is happening in a whole class context, whether their teacher is working with a small group or an individual student, and also whether the teacher is managing instruction or whether the child's working with their peers or they're working alone. Finally, for literacy and math, we have some additional modifiers. So you probably remember from earlier, this CF acronym is code-focused skills, meaning-focused skills, and play. So we're able to really track second by second in the classroom, what kind of instruction is a child getting with a lot of detail. The other piece of the child screen that I want to show you are the student talk buttons. And so we refer to these as the frequency codes, because what we're trying to track is how often is a specific child doing these kinds of things in the classroom. And so in yellow, you see some more kind of lower level participation, things like nonverbal responding, verbal responding to a question, or reading text or math problems aloud. In green, you can see some higher level participation, doing things like answering questions that require reasoning or participating in a discussion. Finally, in blue, you can see some of the social emotional moves that we expect children might make, like being able to use words to resolve a difficult social situation, or moving their bodies away from difficult social situations. So as I mentioned, OLOS also has a teacher component. So this is the teacher screen. It looks very similar to the student screen. Here you can see that we track the same elements for teachers as we do for students, except we don't track whether the teacher is on or off task. We assume teachers are on task throughout their day. And the frequency codes, or the teacher talk codes, here are different than the student code. So you can see in red at the top, again, some sort of lower level teacher talk, like doing things like inviting students to share or expressing interest in students' responses. The yellow codes really get at the teaching, the explaining topic-specific concepts and providing background information. In the green, we see some higher level teacher moves, like directing students to use evidence to support their answers and challenging students to reason. And finally, in blue, we see some of the classroom management moves that we expect teachers to be using in classrooms, like handling disruptions, using positive behavior management strategies, and using smooth transitions. All of these teacher talk and student talk moves have been shown to predict growth in reading skills in children in the K-3 grades. So the other pieces of OLOS that I want to tell you about that we've really been designing to think about practitioners is that we've developed an online training module that teachers can move through at their own pace independently. And so we've kind of harnessed a lot of the lessons that we've all learned over the past year and a half in terms of creating really high quality content for online learning, and created this module so that teachers who we know time is really always something that is highly prized. They can move through this at their own pace on their own time. And we also have developed a really detailed training and certification and reliability process. So here what you can see is an example of when you code a practice video within the reliability system. So you're kind of practicing and seeing, am I using these codes the way that they were intended to be used? You can see here an example of a time when a gold standard coded the same video that you're coding. So in this case, you would be the scored coder. And so second by second, you can really see up here in the content, it looks like this was going really, really well. Here in about minute 7 to 8.5, you can see that there was some disagreement. So you'd be able to rewind, watch that video again, maybe consult the coding manual and see exactly where that disagreement was. So this provides some really detailed information and support and scaffolding for the learner of the observation system to be able to make sure that they're using the system the way that it was intended. Finally, and the part that I think the practitioners on the call might be the most excited about is the teacher dashboard that we've developed. And so here what we've done is as soon as an observation is completed live in the classroom, the information is all sort of digested and put into a dashboard so that it's really easily understood and kind of able to be used immediately to support individualized instruction. So here what you can see is an overview of what happened during an observation. So in this observation, there were 54.8 minutes of literacy observed, 22 minutes of non-instruction, and just a couple minutes of social emotional learning. And just over half of the instruction happened in a whole class setting, where 18.5 minutes happened in a small group and a few minutes in individual instruction. You can, because the system is also designed to capture how students and teachers are talking in the classroom, you can also see an overview of how often those different types of student moves happened in this observation. And similarly, you can see how often the teacher was doing those different moves that I showed you just a few minutes ago. So this gives a really nice overview of what happened in a specific observation of a classroom. But remember, OLOS was also designed to give you really specific information about individual students, and particularly to give information about how close the instruction that was observed matches those recommendations that came from those A2i algorithms based on the assessments. So here what you can see is a page for an individual student. In this graph here, and you can see the distance from recommendation. So how the blue bars show you what was recommended for this specific child. And the yellow bars show in this observation that we just completed, this is how close the minutes we observed got to the recommendations. So this gives teachers some really powerful information. Like, for example, here, this child was recommended to have 20 minutes of child managed code focused instruction, but they only got 8. They got a little bit of extra time in teacher managed code focused than what was recommended. So the teacher can maybe think about rebalancing some of those minutes for this specific child. This is also going to give some more detailed information about the context and content of literacy instruction. So for this specific child, how much time did they spend with their teacher in code focused, with their peers in meaning focused instruction? We also get more detailed information about what kind of math instruction was offered and how much time was spent in some of these other kinds of instruction, like art, social emotional learning, and science. Okay, so now that you have sort of an overview of these tools, I'm really excited to be able to let you hear from a practitioner who's used these tools in a classroom. And so I just kind of want to put up some questions that Sara is going to address, which are, what are the most useful elements of A2i from a practitioner perspective? Where is A2i currently being implemented? What do practitioners find most useful about the OLOS observation tool for individualizing instruction? And what part of the day would she choose to observe to make the information most useful for the teacher? So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and let Sara just talk directly to you all. Sara, go ahead.
All right, thanks, Ashley. I'm excited to share about the implementation of A2i with everybody. So the most useful elements of A2i for teachers, I think, is first of all, the assessments. So the assessments are quick considering the insight that the teachers gain. And they can be used as like a benchmarking tool or a progress monitoring tool. So that's pretty nice. Also, the minute recommendations, I think teachers really enjoy because it gives them research-based recommendations that actually cause growth for their students in the classroom. And then I think the most favorite part of A2i for the educators are the ongoing support. And so we don't just give them our software and then walk away and have them figure it out. I actually walk alongside them the whole way through the process of implementation by doing monthly literacy huddles. And then I do one-on-one in-class coaching. And so I actually go in and give them on-the-spot feedback of how their implementation is going. Where A2i is currently being implemented, of course, is in schools across the country. But what we did then was take the research from A2i and we flipped it to make it a community-wide impact. And so we adapted A2i for communities. So we are now also in PreK programs, in after-school programs, summer programs, and tutoring programs, as well as we made a family-facing platform called Reading Checkup. So now we are all across the community, from schools to after school to summer. And some of our partners include Read Charlotte, which is in Charlotte, North Carolina, and Literacy Mid-South, which is in Tennessee, and then the New York PTA, which is in New York State. So what do practitioners find most useful about OLOS? I would think is the teacher dashboard. The teacher dashboard has a lot of good information, like the teacher and student talk, which helps teachers be more effective in their teacher moves, and also the immediate feedback of it all. And so they don't have to wait until their principals have time to give them feedback. The teacher can just log on and see immediately how the observation went. Also, the student details page, I think, is very powerful as well, since it shows the distance from recommendation based on each student, and then also the student moves. I think it really helps the teacher to see, are they calling on more students, calling on different students more than other students, and how they can make sure that they're being effective in the classroom. So when I choose to observe teachers using OLOS, I choose to do that during the literacy block, because that's when most differentiation is happening. And that's when we have a lot of back and forth with the student and the teacher, so I can record those moves. And so it also gives a very clear picture to the educator of their true distance from the recommended minutes for each of the students.
Great, thank you so much, Sara. And there's going to be some time to ask questions for Sara in just a few minutes. I just have a couple more things that I want to say to the group, which is really talking about the, let's see, sorry about that. There we go. So I want to just talk to you a little bit about what we've done with this tool on the research side over the last several years. So with the power of the network, which is of course these incredible universities across the US, we have been able to complete 4,000 unique observations of students in nearly 200 classrooms in 7 different states, and coded all of the consented children in those classrooms for every minute of those observations. And so we are going to be able to answer some questions like how much coded meaning focused instruction or math instruction or non-instruction is happening in each grade, and whether there are differences among the sites. Some of the questions that are most important to us as a research team are finding out whether there are systematic differences in the classroom experiences of children from different demographic groups. So that includes children of different racial and ethnic backgrounds, and also children who speak multiple languages, or children who have language difficulties. And we're also, one of our central questions is which elements of captured by OLOS are most predictive of children's literacy, math, and social emotional growth across the school year. So just finally putting it all together, A2i provides the assessment and the recommendations to teachers to allow for planning of individualized instruction. And then that lesson planning tool really allows teachers to then choose activities that align with those recommendations. Then OLOS can be used to track children's individual experiences in classrooms. And when OLOS is used alongside A2i, it can give really powerful information to teachers about the extent to which individualized instruction is meeting each child's instructional needs. So just quickly, what I didn't get to tell you about today is that there is work going on behind the scenes to sort of build up the math portion of A2i. And so an assessment is being developed, as well as thinking about working towards getting recommendations for math minutes. And we're also, those of us who are kind of carrying on this work are very interested in English language learners and how we can sort of optimize this system for those learners. And we are going to open it up to questions, but I am going to just put some information here about where you can find me. And also, if you're interested in learning more about the A2i tool, you can find more of that at learningovations.com. I think that's it.
All right. Thanks. Thanks, Ashley and Sara, for that information. I think, the researcher and practitioner perspectives are so helpful to hear on this OLOS tool, and the seamless coordination here between assessment and instruction that the OLOS tool offers is really quite innovative, and I think fills a unique need in the early education landscape. And certainly the technology that drives the tools make them very versatile. We have had several questions come in, so I'm going to go ahead and jump to those and kind of try to group them here thematically. There were several questions that came in related to application in PreK. And so the first question is, has this been adapted for PreK? And what does this all mean for students who are in classrooms outside of a school district? So community-based organizations, Head Start, child care centers, in terms of preschool programming. Let's see, I think we might have, Ashley might be frozen. So let's jump to Sara. I'm going to, if you have any comments on that in terms of use in PreK, have you conducted these observations? Oh, Ashley's back.
Sorry.
No problem. Quick. No.
The Zoom adventures are just endless here, I tell you.
No problem. But yeah, did you hear the question?
I caught the beginning and the end, which is what's going on in PreK, right?
Yes, that's right. That's right. Yeah. How has it been adapted, and how does this apply to that kind of the broad base of PreK settings that are outside of school districts?
Yeah. So we certainly have been really focused on PreK as part of the Early Learning Network. So of the observations in classrooms that were observed, just over a third of them were PreK classrooms. So we really took the time to make sure we oversampled in PreK to make sure that the tool is working in that space. We think that certainly the top half of that screen, so the ability to track literacy and math and the different kinds of those, we did add things like mealtime to the OLOS duration part of the system, because we noticed, kids in PreK, they spend a lot of time in the classroom in mealtime, and there are actually some really great language, some examples of back and forth happening in that period of time. So we wanted to capture that as one of our instructional areas. The frequency codes, or the child move codes, of course, we have to conceptualize a little bit differently what, answering a question that requires reasoning looks like in PreK compared to third grade. And all of that is covered in the training and coding manual in terms of, what does it look like when a pre-K student is reasoning versus a third grader. So that's certainly one of the more, challenging areas, is understanding the subtleties between the younger children and the older children in terms of those student talk moves. But we found that it was, very feasible to use in the pre-K space, and that the teachers were really excited to see the results. And there's really a lot of room, I think, for individualizing instruction. A lot of small group instruction happens in pre-K, even more than what we see, I think, in some of the older grades. So I think that it's a really exciting tool for that space. Mm-hmm. And in terms of outside of the sort of traditional classroom, I think Sara sort of mentioned that there's some work being done to really think about how we can adapt the tool to other spaces that aren't just, a traditional K-3 elementary space. And I think there's no reason to think that these tools couldn't be used in a head. In fact, we have used them in Head Start, but any kind of center-based or even daycare, it could potentially be used there. I will say that the assessments we do recommend are used with children 4 and over, so younger than 4. It was a bit variable on how well children could understand the sort of intention of some of the assessments, so just even the rules. But with kids 4 and up, it was working great. And I think, it can give any kind of educator really powerful information about what a child knows and what a child needs in terms of their instruction.
So another question more specific to early childhood was about, would you recommend that OLOS or A2i replace other standard assessments in the early care and education field that rely more heavily on teacher observation, portfolio documentation? I think this is specific to A2i. So those A2i assessments, or do you see this more as a complement?
I mean, I certainly wouldn't come here and say this should replace everything that's out there. That's not the intention. I think what this can give complementary to some of the other assessments, and specifically observation tools that are out there. In terms of the assessments, I think these do a really good job of covering the theoretical elements of what's important for skilled reading. And so I think that, and they're really quick to administer, they're adaptive, so they're can really sort of hone in on each child's individual level without kind of forcing them to finish an entire assessment if it's just going really poorly for them. And multiple children can do them simultaneously because they're computer-based. And so I know some of those assessments that were mentioned require the teacher to sort of individually administer to each child. So those are some of the advantages of the assessments. In terms of the observation tools that focus primarily on the teacher, I wouldn't say replace. I think this is complementary information to that. I mean, when we observe the teacher, or rate the teacher in some kind of way, we know we're getting one global rating for the classroom. And that information is important in terms of what the teacher is doing, and how supportive the classroom environment is. All of that information is really important. But what that misses is that individual children, even in the same classroom, can have really different experiences of the instruction that's provided to them. And so what the OLOS tool is really able to do is then focus in on, okay, in this same classroom where this kind of instruction is being offered, how are the experiences of individual children varying within that? And I think that's sort of where the field, in my view, has been moving and focusing on, is trying to understand those individual experiences.
Yeah, it does seem to be that's sort of a value add here of both the integration of the assessment tool with that individualized observation, and really getting at that child's experience relative to those teacher moves. Question about play minutes only being recommended in the pre-K stage. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think actually they're in pre-K and K that we see the play minutes. Although in our observations of kindergarten classrooms as part of the network, there was very little play happening within those classrooms. But the algorithms do include play for pre-K and K. And I think, our focus on pre-K for those play algorithms is really just because we know from our, pre-K practitioner partners that play is such a central part of learning in that space. And so we definitely wanted to take that into account and not sort of send the message that, the only thing we're recommending are these instructional minutes and we have to be focused on teaching them these skills. We also know that they need to have this sort of free play space to do sort of this really important work on building up language skills, because that sort of free play time when children can engage in pretend play and creative play is just really critical for those language skills and for other skills as well. So.
Thanks, Sarah. I have a question for you from kind of, you shared some of this, but going back to your perspective as a teacher, what is, why is this set of tools and observation valuable relative to other tools you've used? I'm sure you've used a lot of assessment tools as an educator, as an elementary school teacher, but what is appealing about this?
So I think what's appealing about the A2i assessments is it gives teachers like a global view of students. And so a lot of other assessments kind of dig really deep and get to like the diagnostic aspect of each kiddo. And it's not that. It does more of a global view with the grade equivalent and age equivalent of a kiddo. And so I think that's different than what other assessments can give you. That, and they're pretty quick for being adaptive. And so the fact that the kids can take the same assessments again and again and again, and the test changes according to the kiddo, I think is a really great assessment.
Thanks.
I just want to add in there too that I think one of the other things that is really powerful about both systems is the ability to present that information back to the teachers immediately. So as soon as the assessments are completed, as soon as the observations completed, there are these auto-generated graphs that can show teachers for the assessments, here's where the kids are, here's where we hope they are by the end of this school year. So as you continue to administer it, you can see, are they getting closer to that target line that we want for them by the end of the school year? Are they kind of plateauing? And on the observational side, as soon as that observation is completed, you can see information about, how close they were to the minutes, but also just globally, how often was the child talking in the class? And, what I think has kind of surprised me is how little some kids talk in the classroom. I mean, there are times when we have kids who do not talk the whole time or once or twice the whole day. And I think those are kids that, when teachers see that information, might think, okay, I need to make sure that I'm calling on that child or finding ways to get them involved in the instruction a bit more. So I think that information can be really powerful in terms of individualizing instruction, because I know a lot of assessments and things that happen in classrooms, oftentimes teachers don't get the information back until it's sort of too late to do anything with it. And these tools really attempted to change that and make information for teachers that they can use right away.
And classrooms are such busy places that having that external observation of individual children's behaviors is, I think, also something that's so unique and helpful to teachers. We had a question that was about just an operational element of OLOS observations. Who is actually doing this in the programs you've worked with outside of the research team? Let's go to a real world kind of setting. And how frequently are these observations happening?
So remember that the OLOS tool was developed as part of the Early Learning Network, which means it's only been around for a couple years, really, in its current version. And so it's primarily been used by research teams. So we've trained about 35 to 40 researchers of different, levels from undergrad all the way up to PhD level. And then we've trained, I think, 19 practitioners. And so the practitioners are primarily literacy coaches as of right now. But we do have planned a practitioner feasibility study over this next year, this next academic year, where we're going to be recruiting more teachers to actually use this in the classroom. And I think it's a really great question, because one of the things that we're most interested in knowing is, when would teachers, use this throughout their school year, or even within a single school day? That's why I asked Sara to comment on when's the best time to observe, because we know a teacher is probably not going to be able, or a literacy coach is probably not going to be able to go to a classroom and watch the entire school day, right? If that's just not something that is likely going to be feasible in the real world. So when can you go watch to get the most value out of the information that OLOS can capture? And Sara and I have sort of talked about, going to observe the time when teachers has planned centers or small group stations that the children are moving through, so you can capture when that individualized or differentiated instruction is most likely to happen, and give teachers the best sort of feedback with a live observation. So we're really excited about the opportunity to get this into more practitioners' hands and get their really valuable feedback about, what they think of the information that it provides, and if there are ways to make it even better for teachers. So if you're on this call and you're hearing this and you think, I would love to be a part of that, please do feel free to email me, because we are going to be looking to recruit teachers for that in the upcoming year.
Thanks. It looks like we're about out of time. It's about time to wrap up the conversation. I'm sorry there were other questions we didn't have a chance to get to. So I do encourage you, if you need additional information or would like some follow-up, you can reach out to Ashley or Sara. I think their information, I know you had that on the slides. So be sure to reach out, and I know they'd be happy to answer the questions that you might have. So we do, let me ask, Ashley, do you have anything, or Sara, final takeaway, anything, parting thought?
I mean, I think I would just come back to understanding children's different constellation of skills that they have when they get to the classroom is important, and not just for code focused, for meaning focused skills too. We need to understand what's happening with both. So in order to do that, we need assessments that can capture that information. Understanding the children's levels isn't enough, though. If we have the best assessments out there in the world and we know every single thing about the kids and we don't do anything with it, it's not really, we haven't completed our mission, right? So the mission is take that information and then design our instruction to really meet the needs of each child in the classroom. And that's sort of the overarching goal of what Dr. Connor's work was always focused on. And so I think that's the message that she would want me to leave everybody with.
Thank you. Thanks for that. This concludes the Early Learning Network Spring series. Thank you for joining us today. We do invite you to visit the Early Learning Network website to view the videos from the previous presentations in this series. And you can find that at earlylearningnetwork.unl.edu. And we encourage you to learn more about the network's emerging research. We're really putting a lot of information out now as the series of studies are coming to a conclusion. So we have blogs, tools, other resources available on the Early Learning Network website. Please follow us on Twitter and Facebook to get the latest hot off the press information. And we encourage you to join our mailing list for future research news and updates on future events that we'll be having. So thank you, Ashley and Sara, for presenting such compelling information to us today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Hope you have a wonderful rest of the week. Thanks.